Hello, welcome to another edition of the Pace Report. I'm Brian Pace, reporting live here at the famous Birdland Jazz Club here in New York City. 2017 has been a dynamic as well as pivotal year in commemorating the life of John Coltrane. Now tonight here at Birdland is the Saxophone Summit featuring the legendary Joe Lovano as well as a.k.a. Jazz Master Dave Liebman, and featuring alto saxophonist the great Greg Osby, featuring a stellar rhythm section including the great Cecil McBee on bass as well as the legendary Billy Hart on drums. Now, Joe and Dave just released an album titled Compassion, the Music of John Coltrane, which is now available on Resonant Records, and they do a dynamic tribute to Mr. Coltrane, and they perform songs that are part of his repertoire from the Blue Note as well as Prestige as well as Impulse years. Now tonight I had a chance to sit down and break bread with them to talk about the legacy of John Coltrane, what they mean to them, as well as talk about why they chose some of the songs from this record to commemorate also the legacy of Mr. Coltrane. And we also dissect and talk about the documentary Chasing Trane, which was directed by John Schoenfeld, which was narrated by the legendary as well as Academy Award-winning actor Denzel Washington. So sit back, relax, and enjoy highlights of the official New York record release performance of Compassion, the Music of John Coltrane on Resonant Records, featuring a.k.a. Jazz Master Dave Liebman, Joe Lovano, and special guest Greg Osby, live here at Birdland as part of the Pace Report here in New York City. know, every time we sit down, it's always a class. I know I'm going to get schooled tonight. I want to congratulate you on this brand new record. And this is the year of Trane. We have that dynamic documentary that's out, which was narrated by Academy Award winning actor Denzel Washington. And now you and Joe decided to put together this record. Now, I want to ask you something, because I was looking at the songs.
Yeah.
Locomotion comes from Blue Train.
Yes.
Central Park West, Dear Lord comes from Coltrane Sound.
Well, Dear Lord is later. Dear Lord is from Transition.
That's Transition.
65, yeah.
Yeah, 65. And then you've got Ole. You
That's
do
around 59, 60, record by that name.
Yes.
Atlantic.
Yes.
Because when you do a Train, you do Prestige, Atlantic, and then Impulse. That's how you know kind of the dividing points, the labels he was on.
Right.
And the one record for Blue Note, which is, of course, Blue Train.
What was it about these songs? Because I mean, there's a lot of music that Trane composed and played. What were these? What set this off to make you want to record these?
Well, first of all, in respect to and attempting to be true to the tradition, the blues is the root of the music. And as you just mentioned, the two tunes, Equinox and Locomotion, are blues. I mean, legitimate 12-bar blues. In the case of Locomotion, is actually a little alteration. Just not to get too technical, but it's, as she said, masterclass. Well, here it is. It's a combination of blues and rhythm changes, Locomotion. It's very interesting for the musicians out there. That's number one. And, you know, I also wanted to represent his interest in world music, which is, of course, Africa, India, and Ole, and the Africa Brass record, of course. And also wanted to represent something from the late Trane, which I'm going to say I'm partial to, but I feel has always been underrepresented because it's difficult music. So Compassion, which comes from the Meditation Suite, which we play live with Sax Summit, and we may do this week, later on in the week. I thought that would cover a few of Trane's basic shit. The blues, the world music, and the late Trane. And that's kind of what I was thinking about.
You know, the album really is kind of a myriad, like you said, of a lot of the stuff they did with the three labels, but where he was musically and spiritually, because a lot of the spiritual end came in towards the last 5 or 6 years of his life.
Well, let's put it this way. He announced it. But from his notes, as you read in Love Supreme, he says in 1957 he had an awakening. It seemed like he straightened out his life and got more serious. I mean, more serious than he was before. It's pretty heavy, because he was always very serious. But I think he was, I don't want to say first, because when you say first you can get in trouble, but his titles during the late period, Meditations, Compassion, Love, Consequences, Amen, Dear Lord, I mean, obviously suggest an inclination to express his spirituality. And the thing about Trane that's really wonderful in this sense was it was ecumenical. It wasn't about Christ or Jehovah. It wasn't Jewish. It was Hindu, Buddhism. It was absolutely ecumenical. God, there is a God, and there's a powerful force and acknowledgement of it. And I think that's really, in a certain way, I mean, pretty heavy in an intellectual, philosophical way besides the music. That he stated it in such an ecumenical way, and especially now in a period like we live in where everybody's so sectarian. There's so much conflict between people being the Buddhists versus the Hindus versus the whatever. And here he is in 1965, 67, saying, we're all the same, it's universal, there's a force, acknowledge it. And it's pretty heavy, actually. Philosophically, it's pretty deep, besides the music.
You know, when I hear songs like Alabama, you know, there is definitely like a spiritual connect when you hear it.
I mean, if he was alive now, I don't know if he would ever be able to get through without being, how he would live through, because our period now is so intensely, what's the word, politically correct and announced and focusing, and I don't know if he could have gotten away with what he did, because he was just really purely just spiritual from a very personal standpoint. He wasn't making a crusade, he wasn't calling it anything, he was just acknowledging the power of God in his life. He wasn't saying, you got to feel that way. He was just saying, this is what I feel, this is what I'm doing, and here's the music to reflect it. I mean, you know, in music, it's difficult to say what it means, because it's in the air. Painting, we can look at a photo, we can look at a book, we can discuss the words on page 32. With the music, it's in the air. And it's hard to say, well, was he spiritual, was he not spiritual? I mean, there's Trane's music in the last 2 years was definitely in another world. I don't know what it might be called, to be neutral, I don't know what it would be called, but it definitely was not, it wasn't Locomotion, it was not Equinox, it was another, he had definitely reached another point. Who could imagine what he would have been doing now?
I want to first congratulate you on this album that you collaborated with Dave Liebman. This is really the year for John Coltrane.
Well, John Coltrane's influence is timeless, and this particular year, 50 years of his passing, and also his 90th birthday year was 2016. He was born in 26. We're in a celebration of Coltrane's beautiful spirit, man, and influence, and it's something else.
And this documentary, Chasing Trane, really kind of put the nail in the coffin on how important this man is to not just the idiom of jazz, but what he brought to the American fold of American music.
Well, that particular documentary was put together so well, and it had such a beautiful spiritual feeling. When I left there, realizing the legacy that we all live in, that Coltrane opened the door for so many things to happen, but the doors were open for him also, the way he developed throughout his music and life, you know. And you really realize that we're living in this blessed world of music, you know, more and more. And coming after that film, really, I really felt that. So proud to be a part of the legacy of the music.
This album, which is on Resonance Records, and I love what the guys do at Resonance Records because they're really in the fold of keeping this music alive. When you were recording this record with Dave, what were some of the key things that you wanted to make the listener really key in on this?
Well, you know, we're all listeners, you know, and the thing was, this was recorded for the 40th anniversary of Coltrane's passing. So we did this in 2007 for BBC. They came over to New York from London and recorded us, and like it was a recording session, you know, but it was really just for their broadcast of a big show they were putting together for Coltrane's 40th year anniversary of his passing and in celebration of him. And Resonance put this out now this year for the 50th anniversary, and Dave and I are really thrilled that we retained the master tapes from that recording session, and they did such a beautiful job in the release. We're really proud of it, you know. And the recording live at Temple University with John Coltrane, one of his last performances, really. It's such an amazing document. Just last night, driving home after our set, I listened to that track of Naima about 4 times. I couldn't go to the next tune. I had to hit that repeat button. and it's still vibrating for me right now.
Joe, what did Coltrane do to you as far as your technique, as far as developing your own style? What were some of the things that he did for you, and what are some of the things that you took to a whole nother level as you listen to Coltrane now?
Well, you know, I mean, I feel I'm scratching the surface of trying to be expressive, you know, and get around my instrument and play in a free way, a free-flowing, harmonic, rhythmic, melodic exploration, you know, that's coming from Coltrane, and it's coming from Ornette Coleman, and it's coming from Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker and Coleman Hawkins and Ben Webster and all kinds of folks, you know, Don Byas. When I hear early Coltrane, when he was in his 20s, I'm hearing where he's coming from. Not only what he's playing, but how he's playing it. It's from listening and being on the scene and standing toe-to-toe with all kinds of cats. And in his time in the 50s, when he was really developing, between him and Sonny Rollins and Hank Mobley and, you know, Johnny Griffin, cats were all hearing each other, playing together. That's just a few folks I mentioned. But you could hear how they're feeding off each other and standing tall and being themselves and trying to say something from who they are and where they're coming from. You know, your development on your instrument and in the music, it's the company you keep. And the more you play, the more you'll say things with the people, you know. And that's one big thing I learned from listening to John Coltrane through the years, and those other folks I mentioned, is the communication, the dialogue, and the love, passion, music. You know, in the recent times, I had a chance to play with Ornette, and I played on his last performance that was at Prospect Park. You know, celebrating Ornette, 2014, and he passed a year later, 2015. And I had a chance to know him a little bit and play with him and be around him. And it was all about this cosmic, beautiful, universal music and life. His idea about harmonics was about the harmony of the planet and the universe. and how people could be together and live in harmony and have a dialogue in this tapestry of rhythm that we live also. Not even talking about the music, just as people, you know? But then you get into the dealing with it in musical terms, that is it's a beautiful, blessed place to be. And, you know, people like Ornette Coleman and John Coltrane and Miles felt all that. And every ensemble they played in, just to name those couple cats, you know. I mean, Wayne Shorter's somebody today that lives that completely. And that's why it's so much beautiful love in his music and his delivery and his person.
You know, Dave, as we talked over the years, you know, the tradition of the music, and you know, there are musicians in the idiom that are on a pedestal. We have to put Louis Armstrong there. We have to put Lester Young there. Duke, you know, and Trane is one of these guys that he was like the prince of his generation.
Oh, definitely. But he was a hard worker. You know, this is a guy who knew he had to hit the horn every day. Like Reggie Workman told me, he said if he wasn't playing, he was sleeping. He said he didn't even know who Willie Mays was. Now, I don't know if the people watch this will know. Willie Mays was like a New York icon baseball player, African American, killer of his time. You had to know who Willie Mays was. Right. Reggie said he didn't even know who Willie Mays was. That's how much he was into the horn and practicing. And he came at the right time, Trane. I mean, would somebody else have done it? Probably, but he was able to take the past and at that time the present, and also his, without getting too technical, his interest in different scales, which, you know, became world music-y. I mean, he was the guy to coalesce everything at that time. I mean, he had Bird already laying it down. He had Sonny, he had, you know, Miles. And here this guy comes along and says, let's cover all these bases. It's like he made a list and checked things off as we went along. Okay, giant steps, okay. The Dorian mode, okay. Ballads, beautiful melodies, okay. Blues, and in his case, as we mentioned earlier, blues in a 1-4-5 form, no fancy stuff, absolutely basic. He could have been John Lee Hooker when he played blues. I mean, it's extraordinary what he did.
And he had the gauze to record a blues record. I mean, the Coltrane sound record was, it's in a whole nother stratosphere by itself.
Coltrane plays the blues with alterations. I did a blues record using that as an inspiration to use the blues as a major format, but to alter it. There are a lot of alterations you can do on it. But that was an amazing record and a beautiful record with lyricism really reigns on that record. You know, Coltrane, sometimes the lyricism is put under the harmony in a sense. You know, he raises harmony to a pedestal. But the blues records, of course, the ballads, of course, Duke, and of course, Johnny Hartman.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking melody. I mean, I always said if you want your grandmother to get interested in jazz, the record you give her is ballads.
Yeah.
That will put somebody on the map. They'll say, is that what you call jazz? Oh, I love that. Ballads. That's the crossover record for normal people.
Greg, this is an ongoing musical commune between Joe and Dave, and you're part of the saxophone situation tonight. Tell everybody what John Coltrane means to you as a musician and as a young lion.
Well, in every realm of communication, be it writing, journalism, oration, what have you, there has to be some level of standardization in terms of the lexicon. And John Coltrane in music, or our strata of music, he is responsible to a large degree of establishing some of the communicative properties that we all employ. So he's one of the purveyors of language that we use and we readily refer to. And and for me, he represents somebody with a very reinforced work ethic, who's very focused, very centered, and on a perpetual mission. So that represents a benchmark for me to to aspire towards.
Greg, Trane, he embarked 3 genres of jazz. He did bop, post-bop, and he segued into avant-garde free jazz. And as a saxophonist, what is it about him that people can relate to as far as being a jazz musician?
Well, no matter what he involved himself in and or with, his humanity revealed itself. I mean, he was very transparent, and he didn't hide behind the illusion of any kind of musical smokescreen or blanketing. I mean, what you heard was the man as filtered and interpreted, through his musical wares. I mean, he instilled a whole cadre of devices and approaches and concepts and ideals that allowed him to shine and allowed his perception of the world, his perception of humanity, to speak clearly without any hindrances. So again, he represents honesty, perfection, and transparency.
What's it like playing on the band stage with these great jazz masters? I mean, you've got Cecil McBee, you've got the great Billy Hart, and then you've got a.k.a. jazz master Dave Liebman and Joe Lovano. And when you were coming up in the 80s and 90s, you definitely brought a different voice to the instrument as well as the language of jazz.
Well, I've idolized these gentlemen for many years, and it's actually my honor to share the bandstand with them. I'm here humbly, listening and trying to respond favorably to, whatever they're, throwing down, and also hoping to motivate them with, some things that I want to do, that I'm trying to do, and again, communication is key. Communication and respect. I'd rather be no place than here tonight. Yeah.
What is the John Coltrane? If you were on a desert island, what would be the John Coltrane record that you would definitely have that just would take you in a whole nother stratosphere? If there was the only John Coltrane record you had, which one would it be?
One of my favorites is called Coltrane Sound. It had the Cecil Taylor on piano, and the way Mr. Coltrane played with Cecil Taylor and the way he had to adapt and to adjust to that level of unorthodoxy and unpredictability, that represents the trial and the success of somebody who's accomplished, somebody who's able to respond to alternatives. That's probably one of my favorite Coltrane recordings. This is called Coltrane Sound. Yeah.
Phil, this is a very, very important record. In fact, this is a very important commemoration of John Coltrane and his legacy. And you've been part of this whole entire process for the last 15, 16 years. Tell me about John Coltrane and what he means to you as a musician.
Well, Coltrane was so many things. First of all, you have to look at his dedication. I mean, the stories about his practice routine are legendary. The commitment, the one-mindedness of it. Then you have to look at his message, his spiritual message of his music, and how powerful that was. Then you have to look at his unrelenting pursuit for new ideas, new horizons, and along the way, breaking ground in every which way. On the highest level, creating new lexicon of compositional forms, new lexicon of improvisational and sonic improvisational, expression on the saxophone. And then after he would get to like what you would think would be the highest peak that he could possibly reach inside of that particular environment, he would just break through and go to something else and abandon a lot of things that he was doing before and create a completely new environment. If you look at the early music, the sheets of sound with Miles, and then compositions, the whole cycle compositions like Satellite and Moment's Notice and Giant Steps. And then you look at the later period, the seminal recordings, of course, with Love Supreme, and also with Impressions, the modal period. But he totally abandoned his previous language, which was this streaming kind of mellifluous, long phrases, and got into a whole bunch of other stuff like shorter phrases. He would change his total language, and he kept doing it over and over and over and over again. He was relentless in terms of his creativity and not resting on his laurels and his pursuit of the unknown and trying to create something new with every step along the way. So that's you talk about a legacy and an inspiration. I mean, that's what the inspiration is for me. Not resting on your laurels, being relentlessly creative, and really the pursuit of the unknown in a way. Trying to get to that next level at every step of the way. It's quite awesome. A lot to think about. And when you're playing the music, it's like you're just trying to do the best you can, and you understand that when you do a record like Compassion, there's a lot of different periods that are represented, and you're just trying to bring an honesty to it, and also try to be aware of the compositional environment that each piece has. And that's also the genius of John, is that every piece has a distinct environment that forces you as a player and a creative musician to create something that's very special for that particular piece of music. That's a great composer. I always tell my students, and I always think this, like, if you build a good house, people will know what to do inside of it. If you have a good foundation, musicians will know what to do. And Coltrane always could do that,
do it again for this very special edition of the Pace Report, reporting live here at Birdland here in New York City. I'd like to personally congratulate Resonance Records as well as Mr. Joe Lovano and Dave Liebman for their brand new recording, Compassion, the music of John Coltrane. Make sure you go out and buy and support this project, which is now available on Resonance Records website, as well as iTunes, as well as Amazon.com. I'd like to personally thank Mr. Greg Osby, as well as the dynamic Joe Lovano and Dave Liebman for their time. Also, Mr. Cecil McBee and the legendary Billy Hart. Also, I'd like to personally thank the staff and management here at Birdland for the warm hospitality as always, as well as I'd like to personally thank Miss Lydia Liebman for arranging my time with these prestigious gentlemen. As always, please visit my website, www.thepacereport.com, for my weekly column, as well as my past segments. Until next time, remember, if it's in the groove, it'll make you move. Until next time, peace.